Yeah, we're starting.
What's up, man?
You didn't know I was doing it,
Well, I
did you?
didn't have the window up. So, hey, what's up, everyone?
Hey, welcome to the Kansas City Underground podcast.
Thanks, man.
It's been a minute.
We've said that a lot at the beginning. That should
Lately,
be
yeah,
our
we should
introduction.
stop saying it.
Dude, we're finally kind of getting back on track. We've taken a little
We did.
hiatus,
Yeah,
sabbatical, rest, pause.
I don't know if it was a hiatus because we still recorded. It was just a bit of a turn. We gave ourselves a gap so we could capture a couple of interviews, and we got one of them.
That's true. That's true.
Which you got to hear last week.
My friend Mark Thrash with Novo last week. Yeah, man, really good stuff. We didn't talk about team. It's funny because we were recording. We were talking about team dynamics, and one of the examples we used was the Olympics, the men's basketball team.
Oh yeah,
we were both basketball players, and it while we were recording, that we were playing in the semifinal game against Serbia.
Yeah,
and won by like a point.
Yeah,
because Steph Curry went nuts, and we were like, he was texting me later. It's like, dude, we almost jinxed them because we were, like talking about that game. So, but then they rallied. So it's all good.
I thought you were going to talk about teamwork, about how you had to call me while I was on vacation to get you set up.
That was great. That was a great team. Brian, we're FaceTiming, making sure I'm getting all the recording stuff right. Because usually Brian does all the tech stuff, and I just look pretty. But we switched because you got that FaceTime. You're clearly on the beach. You got that tan skin. You didn't have your shirt on. You had a glow. I found out later it's probably you're just dehydrated. It's like 130 degrees. But you had a good vacation.
It was great. It's good to be back, though.
Yeah, and with that, man, we are. This is the final topic. Which is crazy, man. We've been
700 episodes later.
It's been great. It's been super helpful, and we just want to thank again our friends from TwoFourEight. Yeah, this has been a year-long process of
something like that,
diving into their 15 observations of disciple-making movements in more urban settings. So it's just been giving us a lot of good topics that we didn't have to come up with ourselves, which is great. It's been a learning thing for us because they got to talk to so many different movement leaders in urban settings globally. And we got to be like, okay, how are we doing this? How are we not doing this? How has this been contextualized in like a Western American city like Kansas City? Things that we need to grow in. So it's been good. But this week is an interesting. I like it. It's a final topic, but
yeah, I was gonna say it's not the final week, but it's the final topic.
Yeah.
We do have to figure out who we're going to interview for this.
Yeah. We haven't talked. Brian and I need to get in the same room. Talk about what's next.
We got some planning work.
The podcast world. I know we're gonna re-record some of our greatest hits. That's what I'm calling it. I'm assuming the greatest hits.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean, it might be a little biased to say the greatest.
The least crappiest hits is what we got going. Now, like ones that are recorded or listened to a lot in different settings, but we didn't have our video.
Yeah, but also like, what have we learned? What has innovated off of those topics from 2 and 3 years ago? Like we started this in the middle of the pandemic, right?
Right. It was the whole idea of this podcast
was like, how do we communicate and equip, coach, offer ideas in the middle of we're stuck in our houses?
It was funny because you had this idea and you're like, yeah, but we can stop it whenever. Who knows if anyone's going to listen to this? And I think it scratched the itch a little bit of where people were like, during the pandemic in particular, a lot of leaders, but also people in the city, just everyday people, eyes were open to maybe we have to rethink some of just our ways, right? So I think that was part of why we started. The podcast was helpful in that season.
Yeah.
But I think what we found a lot with this podcast, and we're not the only podcast that this is, helpful with, but like there are more and more people that are just asking different questions when it comes to reaching people in church and all that stuff. And I think we've been doing it for a minute, and our journeys have been a long time coming. And so I think for us, as we talk about disciple making movements, we talk about simple microchurch expressions emerging throughout the city. There's 1,000 little things. The simplicity is still there. Yeah. We want to mobilize everyday people to reach their people and start new groups. Like that's really what it is. But like we look at it from the structure on the back end, some of the vision, and then all these things within movements in urban context, places that more like cities, suburban areas as well. Throw that in there. There's just dynamics that are different than sometimes in a rural or tribal context. So that's so shout out, thank you to TwoFourEight.
Yep,
and what you've done. Should we go to this last topic?
We should.
What is it?
Create intentional and consistent rhythms of connection. So we should say, in complete honesty, we kind of felt like this was a little similar to the last one. And we're trying to like understand, hey, what's the difference between create ongoing team learning environments with application and reflection, which is what we covered a few weeks back. Like there's some similarities, but we think we have also landed on, here's what we think they mean by this.
Yeah.
And we're going to lean into what we think they mean. And if it's not, it might be observation number 16.
Yeah. So we think that the last topic, we talked about team rhythms and learning environments. We think that was more for disciple makers.
Yeah,
and
leaders that are getting together to think about how, like, what's working where.
Yep. Yeah. This is more looking at every level of engagement. That's the parentheses. So creating intentional and consistent rhythms of connection at every level of engagement. We're thinking that's probably more the fruit that happens from disciple makers. So this isn't everyday spaces. These are new groups, new churches. This is the harvest field, quote unquote. Right. So that's what we think. We're going to lean into that.
And as I'm reading it now, reading this potential strategy, urban disciple makers should meet, pray, and interact very regularly and consistently with their teams, groups, and disciples. There's another side of this. It's like, it's also macro, like as the network, you should consider those rhythms. It kind of makes me think back to the tool we did a few weeks ago as well with like the rhythms. It's like you need crowd spaces. You need to belong at that. Like other people are doing this all over the place. Get together, pray, encourage one another, inspire one another. But also as microchurches and these extended families emerge out of new disciple making in your context, like you need consistent rhythms there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, man, life happens. People get distracted. We move on. We don't create space for each other. We're going to say yes to other things that continually pull us away from this.
Yeah, I think maybe that is, we're just going to highlight one word. It's consistency, right? So it's create consistent rhythms. The scripture that is used, and Brian loves this scripture. It's never been used in a guilt trip way in the church. I'm going to read it. Hebrews 10:25. Let us consider how to stir one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So our conclusion, and Brian's passionate conclusion, is this means we can't stop meeting together Sunday mornings at church, right?
Don't get me all fired up. Don't stir this pot.
I want to see that passion, baby.
I left my Bible out in the other room, so I'm going to read it from the NIV Adventure Bible.
Ooh.
But this Hebrews 10 passage, I was getting, as we were preparing, I was saying, I get frustrated because I can't tell you the number of times through the years that I've heard people use this for a guilt trip to say you better show up on Sunday mornings because Hebrews 10:25 says don't neglect meeting together, and that's why you better be back here next Sunday. And this passage is written like the first part of Hebrews 10 is Christ's sacrifice once for all. And the writer of Hebrews, whoever it was saying like the priests on earth are standing and they're making these sacrifices over and over and over, right? Like he even does some cool stuff where he's like, they're always standing. They're always entering the temple courts. They're always making the sacrifices day after day. But then he says, but Christ's sacrifice is once for all, and he's seated. So he's not standing. He's not pacing. He's not making the same sacrifice over and over. And he doesn't, I mean, he might mean once for all people, but he means like once for all time. Like it's done. We don't have to keep doing this. So he's writing that. And then, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, he's telling them to persevere. But like, we got to remember when he's telling them to persevere, he's like, this is like an everyday sort of reality of a bunch of people who live in a time when they're not really welcomed as Christians. And he's telling them to live their life as ones that, like lean into this new identity that you have in Christ. And so that whole, like, let us not give up meeting together is not a Sorry, I
You
just
keep
went
going,
off
babe.
on a long
It's good,
tangent,
man.
but
Keep
it's
going.
like
I like it.
in the context of this passage, it is not show up on Sunday morning. I'm not saying that it is not about that. It's just not limited to that.
Yeah.
It's about all of life. Like give yourselves to one another
Mm.
because you need each other.
Beautiful.
You can't do this alone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that is the heartbeat of what this observation is, right? So, like the consistency, and I want to just acknowledge probably what so many listeners have felt is that the I don't know, just the freaking time and busyness of our society, right? Like we just have so much stuff going on all the time. How can I do anything more? Like there's so much. There's so much. It's overwhelming. How do we do this and this and this? How do we be consistent and going to church, quote unquote? How do we be consistent in loving our neighbors? How do we be consistent in just getting our homework and getting like dinner
Yeah.
on the table, right? All these things that are overwhelming. And then it's like what we're observing within movements is that consistency is huge. We've got to fight for consistency in the midst of the craziness. And that's at every level. Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you actually fight and live with consistency on mission and with teammates of some capacity? And that's probably why this is an observation that is here, because it's in a sense, it's kind of maybe countercultural. I mean, that's what I'm wondering, if this is a countercultural thing where we have to fight for it because it's so important.
Yeah, and it's also framed in light of disciple making.
Yep.
If you're not together, you can't mirror the way someone else is living. I don't actually know how you do this in the minutia. This is why it's so much bigger than Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Don't give up meeting together for an hour a week is not changing my life, because I don't know what you do when you and your wife have a fight. I've never seen it happen, because you won't do it on Sunday morning in front of us.
We totally.
Yeah, you guys might.
Yeah.
But
usually
man,
because the kids are late.
Come on. What's coming to mind is this. I just finished that John Mark Comer book on whatever it's called, Practicing the Way.
Yeah.
And he talks about apprenticeship to Jesus, and this line in there about having, I forget what the line is, but it's something about having the dust of your rabbi on you. And the idea that you're so close to them, walking around with them on these dusty roads, that it's like the dust of the rabbi is on you.
Yep.
You've been with them so much that wherever they walk, their dust is blowing up all over you. So you've seen their life in all of these ways. And so it's like, well, I'm not in that world. I do have a family. I can't like follow somebody that much, but I need to consistently be in it. If all of this, all these 15 observations, and especially this one, is couched in we actually want to make disciples that are mirroring their life to someone else and helping them be apprenticed in the rhythms and the ways of Jesus, it won't happen in small amounts of time occasionally.
Yeah.
It has to be the everyday stuff of life.
That's good.
And it has to be often. And it's not just the big stuff. It's not just, here's what this passage means. Now go, good luck. It's like, here's what this passage means. And now, like, let's try it over here together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've spent, a lot of the last couple of weeks, or at least the weeks that we talked about the last topic. I don't know when they were released, but looking at teams of disciple makers, people who are doing this together. How do you consistently get together, encourage one another? We talked about coaching relationships. We talked about a lot of those things. So I think that's still applicable in this observation. I do wonder if it would be helpful for us to lean in kind of on what does it look like to have consistency among the context at which God's called you, right? Like, so living on mission, but also as things begin to emerge, what is that? How do you be consistent in that? What is consistency in an ultra busy, environment like we have in Western context cities? And there's this really, really brilliant quote that I'm seeing in this observation. I mean,
Gosh, you're about to. I didn't realize you were building yourself up so much, but you are.
Whoa. All it says is this quote is from C, a city in North America. That's all I know. That's all we know. But there's just this brilliant quote. No, I do think it's worth talking about this.
That caught me off guard.
It's worth talking about this if we're looking at like what's emerging, side of the conversation as far as consistent rhythms. And this is a quote apparently by me. I think I've said things like this before, so it sounds like something we would say. We were talking about when we actually consider something a church, because that's language we tend to, obviously we're a network of microchurches. So
Yep.
we're a disciple making movement resulting in, a church planting movement is what we're going. So
That's the aim.
we're actually talking about we give the form of church a name so that people kind of wrap their mind around it. We're building towards this, and these pop up. And what does it actually look like when these actually are New Testament church rhythms? So the quote that I think it was me, I don't know who else would be able to see, because is whenever we start to see a group that has any kind of rhythm, we begin to call those rhythms of worship community. We begin to call those rhythms of worship community mission. Man, whoever said
You
this
can't
is
even
unclear.
quote.
It's very
That's what I
unclear.
was about to say. This brilliant quote that you can't say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I said it way more eloquent than this, right? No, we essentially validate that as the church early on, and it goes for, my goodness.
You want me to read the brilliant
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
by
I
you?
can't read my own
Whenever we
words.
start to see a group that has any kind of rhythm, we begin to call those rhythms of worship, community, and mission.
That's brilliant. So brilliant.
We essentially validate that as the church early on. And it goes far beyond the gathering time. It's like the microchurch is a family that lives out rhythms far beyond one DBS moment.
So a lot of that comes from things that you're passionate about.
Yes.
Like that a family it's not just when we do this one thing, this one discovery Bible study setting when we meet together. That's our only family time. It's like, no, that's one of the things that this family does. And I do think that is so important in the life of, particularly in a Western city where we so quickly equate like a time, a programmatic set apart time as the thing,
Yeah.
And we're saying, no, we've got to actually embrace family rhythms far greater than that. And that's just something that I don't think Westerners do naturally. So that's something I know you lean into
It
a
is
lot.
subversive. Yeah. Well, I think that, in light of our conversation about recording some of these older episodes, like how we've moved, how we've shifted, is like, man, I absolutely want consistency in a gathering around this space and time.
Right.
But if there's one thing that I feel I've moved toward over the last 3 or 4 years, it's like and I think it can only come after living into this, of not having a consistent, like, leave here, go here for an hour, come back. Is like, and having to pay attention more to where else is disciple making permeating our family. Breakfast table conversations. Son and mom had a blow up, and I'm doing a, like, what does Jesus say about this in our family?
Man, way to throw Kristen under the bus there. My goodness.
Well, I can promise you it wasn't her that caused the blow up. So, like, what all of these other spaces where spirituality comes up, and not just within our tight knit close family, but like, where is Nana informing the grandkids, and like, how is that important to all of the other spaces? And early on feeling like, oh gosh, if we don't have like a Sunday morning gathering, our kids are going to be lost and they'll never meet Jesus and fully surrender to him. And then like 4 years later going, oh, it's all these other spaces that actually led them to surrender their life to Jesus, be baptized, and start asking different questions. That feeling so much less pressure to go, that's okay if we don't meet on a Sunday. Like, we missed most of July with gathering with our microchurch family.
Yeah.
And to go, that's all right.
Yeah.
I miss them. Like, I'm sad about that. But I don't feel like that guilt and that shame that used to be put on me because I'm or neglected to meet together.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that microchurch family met in a whole lot of other spaces in all kinds of different ways through July. We just missed those Sunday morning consistency of, which is like, it's funny because now I sent a text out that was like, hey, we miss meeting together. We're back together this Sunday, and we're like back into a rhythm, and we're celebrating that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I'm going to ask you, because I think both of those things are true. Like you had to get away from this, like, what gathering together looks like or has to look like almost this like guilt trip religion type of type of way of discussing don't neglect to meet together. But then you're simultaneously saying how important it is to meet together. And so can both of those things be true in this conversation? And I think
Yes.
that's where we're kind of wrestling with.
We're
It's
celebrating
like,
it.
yeah.
And
No,
that's like a group of people in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And when I think about other contexts in the underground, and the document even notes it, like it looks different on all of these spaces. And when you're thinking about an urban context, it's like, yeah, we've got some families that live near each other, some people that are just committed that don't live near each other but love each other. But when you think, I don't know, Rick and Alice are coming to mind. You know, like what's happening with Street Church. Their consistency is just showing up week after week on Fridays and spending a lengthy amount of time.
They will be there every week, no matter what. That's what consistency is. Yeah.
And then if there's texting that can happen, it happens. And then with their team of leaders that are doing, you know, work among the houseless in different parks, they're trying to now wrestle, how do we get together that are working in these different spaces and hear what we're learning, which goes back to last week, but also comes back to this where it's like,
it's a good case
I've
study.
got this thing over here, but I've also got you guys that are encouraging me. And so I think that goes back to what you're saying earlier on, where it's like, I think the difference is not prescribing Hebrews 10 and saying gathering together looks like this. It's saying gathering together matters. How are you going to do it?
Oh, that's good. That's a reel. Come on. That's good. Brian always saying he putting me on as the reels. I'm like, stop that. That was good. That was worth a reel right there, whatever.
We'll see if it happens.
Yeah. When you're in charge of it, I guess you get to choose. No, I think that's so good. And that's so much. I mean, that's going back to the biblical principles conversation we had a few weeks back. It's like we put the tool or the rule. We put the tool or the rule first, and we put the principle second far too often. But you flip that and be like, oh, wait, no, it's so important. Do not forget to regularly meet together. Don't neglect that. That's true. Don't put whatever your religious mental picture of what that means necessarily, and don't flip the two. You know, like that. That's really, really, really good, really important. Simultaneously, I don't know if this is from the other side of it, or I'm just trying to think super practically. In a lot of the worlds that I've been in, we live in a relatively wealthy county in Kansas City, where, you know, school activities and youth sports is life, right? It's like everything. In one way, it's the best way to connect and meet people. In other ways, it takes up your entire life. And yes, I'm speaking personally, trying to figure out how all this looks like. And so what does it look like to not neglect meeting together, right? Like it is like, all right, I'm tired. We've had so many activities, but man, we can't do this without rubbing shoulders with people. We've got to build space. So if that means I need to simplify certain things, and this is even after we talk about how we merge like, you know, we talk about this a lot in underground. It's like, and try to, instead of having all these different contexts, try to like live rhythms where it merges. Like, so my mission field is where I'm already doing life, right? That's, we talk about that a lot, but even in that, there's so much busyness that happens in an American city, in an American context. So I think it's a spiritual discipline to fight for rhythms and to be consistent and be creative. I mean, we're even getting to a point in our microchurch gathering, our microchurch family is like when we gather on Sundays, because there's like,
turns out Sunday morning is a good time.
Well, Sunday morning is a good time, but not always, because now there's so many tournaments and so many things. So we'll be like, here's our options. Early time, what if we all do lunch? So a couple weeks ago we did lunch on a Sunday. We grilled burgers instead of eating donuts, because usually we're donut, like our group text is called Donuts and Jesus. Like, and it's like, okay, we grilled burgers together, and we just treated it as what we always do on Sunday mornings, was just push back 3 hours. I think that's been one way that we were like, okay, we're fighting for consistency, but we have to adjust a little bit. That's the reality of our culture. You know, like, so, but I think it's so important. We have to fight for those consistent rhythms.
What was the question you asked me a while ago? What does it look like? Yeah. While you're saying that, I'm like pulling out, oh, you guys eat together. I mean, what do families do? That's the question anytime we do training, we go, hey, before you ask your question, just go ahead and try to answer it yourself.
Mhm.
What does a healthy family do?
Mhm.
I I don't have like a study on hand to quote, but I heard a lot, right?
Mhm.
That when we eat together, that you'll see a
Yeah.
healthier family on the
Yeah.
backside of it, because there's time that we're looking at each other face to face. We're hearing about our day. I know what's happening in your world.
Mhm.
You look sad. What happened? Like I can discern that with
Yeah.
my kids, like, and then I get to process that. Healthy families eat together.
Hey, wait, with that real quickly to and I know you got some other good stuff with it, like direct comparison, my family, we have all these sports activities. I'm coaching football like 4 days a week between my 2 boys, and we have looked at our schedule and we're like, "We're not gonna eat dinner together unless we" so we're now like 3 days a week, our dinner time is now 2 hours later than it was before because we're
Yeah.
like fighting for that
Yeah, yeah,
consistency.
yeah.
In that family
Exactly, yeah.
setting, we have like fighting for consistency. Okay, so on Mondays we're gonna eat at 5:15, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays we're gonna eat at 8.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't like that, but it's worth it
Yeah.
so that we can be at the table
Yeah, yeah,
together.
yeah.
So same
Yeah, we're
same
doing the
concept.
same thing. I
Yeah.
mean, we got all the kids too. Everybody wants to play a sport, and it's like, whew, how do we be together?
Yeah.
Um, and um, I mean, just real quick, the flip side, all of my kids have been in one school until last year, and then Cash goes to middle school, and
Yeah.
it's like, I love just being up way before everybody, getting my time
Yeah.
alone, getting a workout in. But he's got to leave way earlier now. And I'm like, all right, if I want time with that dude, I got to
Mhm.
change me,
Mhm.
because he's stuck on a schedule. I can't like break that one, you know?
Mhm.
And so it's like you make those shifts. You got to be willing to say no to some things. So if healthy families eat together, healthy families play together.
Amen to that. Thrash talked about that last week.
Yeah.
Like teams play together a lot too. Like just we've got to have fun.
Yeah. All
Huge.
work. And I always say, like, all the tailgates through the fall make Sunday mornings better,
Totally.
because that space of just being present and attaching with no expectation to show up and like
Mhm.
doing the harder spiritual work is I can show up and do the harder spiritual work because you know my story, you
Mm.
know the other things that have happened.
I love that.
Healthy families rest and recreate together. So the difference there
Mm.
is like not just play together, but recreate. Like we Sabbath, like
Mhm.
take a break from the phones, the screens,
Mhm.
all that stuff. And you could say get out and go for a hike is like the play, but it's also like I'm recreating together. Study and learn together.
Mm.
I mean, teach your family how to do something. You were just talking about teaching your daughter how to play guitar.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's good.
My kindergarten daughter. So we start with like watching videos on YouTube during our microchurch time of kids worship songs, and there was one like a 10 or 12-year-old girl playing, and Hannah's like, yeah, I want to do that. So I was like, yeah. So
I love how lit up you get about that too.
she's awesome. Yeah, it's fun.
Future Taylor Swift. We worship together. Healthy families do that,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds like I'm leaning over into the spiritual side, but it's like if you can think what a good, healthy family that would produce people that look like Jesus in the natural way looks like, then just export all that into the
Mm.
spiritual side of the microchurch and go, that's what's going to make a healthy family that reproduces healthy disciples that would see new disciple makers reproduce healthy families.
Mm.
And you, exactly what you said, you have to fight for it,
Yeah.
like tooth and nail. Like we're losing something. We need to have a family meeting.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
We need to make some
I bet
decisions.
you and Brian calls family meetings. That's intimidating. When Papa calls
I was like,
family meeting. All right.
all right,
Question.
yeah, yeah,
Are you done with all that? Because that's good stuff.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want to
yeah.
cut you off. I wonder, and I'm not like, going to redraw any major things that we have, but I'm wondering if this is helpful to even think about church. So we always talk about worship, community, mission. This is where that quote that of mine earlier comes in. But I think it's worth talking about. Like worship, community, and mission, that overlap. We start to say that's you got church going on. Like it's more of an identity than it is like a set of practices. I mean, part of me wants to, within our own culture, add a fourth circle of called rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
Where because that's at least when it really gets practical for me. That group, if it's a DBS, if it's a regular family, they have regular rhythms, worship, community, and mission. Then all of a sudden, it's like that helps me and helps coaching relationships validate like that actually is a spiritual family. That's how important I think consistency and
Mhm.
rhythms are. Otherwise, just a random thing we do on the side.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if anyone else would fully agree with me in this, but like at least on a practical level on the ground, and that's what that quote is. There's any kind of regular rhythm to it. We're going to validate that as a church early on.
Yeah, we have the tool of 2, 2, and 2 to say, like, you need these as a minimum. These are healthy rhythms that you need to have with worship, healthy rhythms with mission. But I think, like, to your point, sometimes it's helpful just to see it separately, to go like, or to draw a big circle around those things and go like, what are the rhythms? Like I need to see it. I don't need to just see two. And I think it's like, that's a good place to start. That's probably not the best place to like, and we always talk about 2, 2, and 2 as like, that's a healthy rhythm to go like, well, if it's any lower than that, we're probably not doing enough.
You want to quickly unpack the 2, 2, and 2?
Oh yeah. So we're saying like, the tool is, we should just do a podcast on this. At least twice a month, you should be getting together to study scripture, share a meal together, pray, care for one another's needs. That's the worship. Rhythms and worship, right? Rhythms and community at least twice a month. Be caring for one another's needs beyond just like, how can I pray for you? But legitimately like showing up, doing the one another's of scripture. Sharing meals together, like doing low-key stuff that is just building the family in those ways. And then at least twice a month, we're doing something that is on mission in our context. We always say mission is making disciples, but like, what's the missional activity that flows out of that? Yeah. What's a meaningful missional activity? And at least twice a month do that so that you're making the kingdom tangible on earth as it is in heaven. Those are healthy rhythms to say, like we always explain the metaphor like a resting heart rate. If you're going any lower than 222, it's probably not healthy enough to really see church, the identity happening. If you go way above that, you might be doing too much, and it might burn you out, and then you'll quit. So like, what the healthy resting rhythm is 2, 2, and 2 to balance life. But I'm also seeing like, the more we go in this and the more family oriented we are and the more integration that happens, 2, 2, and 2 is like that's a low resting heart rate, but it's a good starting point to like help us move where we want. We can come back and do that episode.
I think you're, I don't know if you're meaning to, but I think you're validating what I was saying earlier. Like, because we see how important 2, 2, and 2 is, like if you're below that, like you're probably, you got a 40 resting heartbeat, you're either in incredible Iron Man shape or you dying, and like it's one of those two things. So I think it is important enough. Like, I think there are cultural things that may heighten the importance of at least the communication. Because we are so individualized in the way that we think about life, community rhythms are foreign to us. Healthy family rhythms are foreign to a lot of Americans. That maybe elevating consistency is an important thing, but not programmatic consistency.
Right.
And that's where it is different. We're talking like the 2, 2, 2 tool is very general also. Like it's kind of like everything we do. It's like, here's a framework to help you think about it.
Because it's taking a principle and going like, this is what we see.
Exactly. Live this out. It is so important to be consistent, but don't hold it over people's heads where it's not. That means now we have to meet our microchurch on Sunday mornings every single week where we are being disobedient to God. Like, that's not the point of what we're saying. So it is that tricky gray area where we have to lean into it hard, but it can't be just programmatic.
And it's over the course of a year, a month, life. I just admitted we didn't meet together for the whole month of July. It's like,
and I've been judging you hardcore since you said that, bro.
It's like, when you consider but our family, as a family, we also like took a big step back that month. So it's about full integration, and just like, also just, this is why I keep using this in every setting I'm in. My 12-year-old is playing a game that is this long. He is like, I need this now. I want this now. If I don't get this now, and I'm playing a game that's this long. And I'm saying no to your little thing now, because I know how it will affect this long-term life that you're living. And so like, take some deep breaths to put it in context of create intentional rhythms and have all kinds of grace for yourself when
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't happen.
it's so good, man. Like, because you're right, we talk about rest a lot and how we do that really poorly. Fight for that. Even the other day, I told you it was like we've been a little bit more inconsistent in our particular families, microchurch setting, and we love these people, but yeah, people travel so much in July in particular, and you're like, it's good to rest. And I think you were kind of talking to yourself too, because you're like,
Probably, yeah.
it's like, all right, but at the same time, it's good when we miss it, and
That's right. That's telling you how important it is.
yeah, we do miss it. And I think but it's also the fear. I think I want to just like voice this. There's a fear of like, if you're a missionary disciple maker out there and people don't seem to miss it or lean in, there's that kind of like constant fear of like, I gotta keep going so that people, like, if we lose all of our momentum, we're screwed. People aren't consistently meeting together for this time. And that's a real thing. That's a real temptation so give yourself grace for it, but also like that is a real thing.
And that's why ongoing coaching is important.
Yeah.
To sit in spaces where you go, hey, we haven't been there and we're just going to, I just want to confess it to this group of people and to say we're turning back toward intentionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But even among the harvest, voice cracks, man, someday puberty is going to be amazing. But like there is that people are out there and they got so busy. I remember early on as a family that, we do so much life with them now, and to see the way that God's worked in their life over the years has been so fun. But they're early people in our church setting, and they couldn't come a couple weeks in a row. This is probably 2 years ago. And they actually said, and I appreciated this. They're like, hey, we're this, and this. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere. And it was really cool. They're like, because that was part of that. Like, it was early enough. It was like, we got to see all this stuff going on. Is there buy-in in the same way that Susan and I feel buy-in? And so that's like that phrase. We're not going anywhere. Don't worry. Was like, okay, you just have to miss because of life. Mm-hmm, I get that. So it's like grace for that. But I mean, it's a real thing. That's a fear that is worth voicing that as a disciple maker, because I've said this so many times, it can take weeks and weeks and weeks to get something on the calendar.
Yeah.
So for anything, any rhythm that you're trying to do, it can take weeks to get on the calendar. So when I sit with movement leaders globally, and like they just talk about their own rhythms and how often they meet and ask questions from Americans and how long it takes to get a group of some kind going. And I'm all like, it takes me 6 weeks. We both pull out our calendars and we figure out when we can even have dinner. Like that is so normal.
But slowly, as we say yes to each other, it's easier to integrate those lives and those rhythms.
100%. So I think this ended up being way more helpful than I think we anticipated in the first, because we were like, I think we know what we're going to talk about. But for at least it's helpful for us. I do think rhythm's so important. Fight for them, at the same time, give yourself a lot of grace. Understand this is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And both of those things are true.
Yeah, and we'll try to get some good interviews off this.
Or we'll just move on.
Or that.
We will get at least a good interview.
Yeah. All right. See y'all next week.